Hey everybody, we're doing a breadcrumbs today. We're in Jeremiah 19 and 20 and Daniel chapter 1. And so as we go through and we transition into the book of Daniel, just want to share a few thoughts that were stirring in my heart as we think about this. Number one, obviously, the things that Jeremiah is prophesying about are now occurring in Daniel's lifetime. And so there's a bit of overlap there. Daniel's a young man when they go into captivity along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They head into Babylonia as young men. They would have been about 16 or 17 years old, and they're beginning to experience the judgment that we've been reading about that has been coming from the Lord, spoken through the mouth of his prophet Jeremiah. And we know later on in the book of Daniel, Daniel is familiar with these prophecies we've been reading in Jeremiah because it's prophesied in the book of Jeremiah that Israel will be in captivity for 70 years. And so at the end of those 70 years, Daniel realizes that the time has come up and he begins to intercede as a prophet for the return and restoration of his people. And so he's at the beginning of the exile and Daniel's there at the very end of the exile. So he is an old man by the time it's time for the people of Israel to leave Babylon. But here we're at the front end of this experience, and you might imagine you're living your life and you have your dreams for where you're going to go, and you'll have a family, you'll be married, you'll have a career, you'll be living in the land of where you're from, and then one day you're led into captivity, and all of that changes for these young men. And the trauma of that, many scholars believe that these young men would have been emasculated, and they would have been eunuchs, not allowed to marry. They're there to serve the king of Babylon. They're in captivity. So everything that they thought their life would look like has all shifted and changed overnight almost. And although Daniel himself was not guilty of the sins, obviously, that the Lord has been speaking of through the mouth of his prophets, when God moves against a corporate nation corporately and is judging, it's a national sin that he's bringing his judgment. Individual lives get caught up in that drama and that trauma. So it's interesting in Daniel chapter 9, we're going to see when he begins to intercede, he counts himself as guilty before the Lord for the sins of his people and his ancestors. And so as we look at the macro level, as God brings his judgment on the earth and sin has ripened, how do we serve God as his people in the midst of those judgments becomes a key question. And Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are held up as examples of faithful sons in the midst of trial and tribulation, in the midst of living in an ungodly, worldly system called Babylon. And of course, we know the story as it goes. We'll read about it going forward of the fiery furnace and Daniel being thrown in the lion's den. And we tend to think of these as kid stories, but they're anything but for children. These are stories and testimonies of great courageous faith in the midst of incredible governmental pressure to compromise and to worship things that are not God's, and to compromise the faith. And so here we are at the beginning, and we're already seeing the pressure here in Daniel chapter 1 of these young men given the opportunity to eat all the choicest food from the king's table, and they're tested right away, and they choose to remain loyal to God and not eat the delicacies from the bounty of the king's table, and they're choosing to eat vegetables. That puts the captain of the guard at risk because if they're seen to be wasting away, his life is on the line, and so he's worried about dying. But God backs up the faith of his people. They're actually more robust after eating just vegetables and drinking just water than the rest of the young men in the court who had been eating the choicest food from the king's table. And so faith in God is being upheld right as we go into this season of judgment. God is still for his people. He's still preserving his people. He's still honoring the faith of his people. And he's got a plan for Israel, even in the midst of being exiled. He's not done with them. He's going to restore them, but he is disciplining them in a very severe way, just as he said he would. And so as we transition into the book of Daniel, we're just thinking about all these great lessons that are reflected here, and the power and the severity of how accurate God's prophetic words are, and how key it is when he's continuing to call for us to repent, to renounce, and to come out from ungodly behavior, ungodly lifestyles, things that are anti-Christ and anti his word. If we don't break from those things, we are subject to his wrath. And so the wisdom of humbling ourselves before God and walking in a way that honors his word and is in obedience to his commands is the wisest thing we can do. And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel are known as, wise men. And here, even in Babylon, they're recognized by the Babylonians as men of great wisdom and understanding. So anyway, looking forward to going through Daniel, key book in the Bible. It's going to be very important to us as we understand the book of Revelation and a lot of the times of the end. Daniel is going to become a key book to try and understand as we walk through the scriptures together. So looking forward to that and enjoying Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, and the pressures that he's under, bringing a very difficult word to Israel and paying a high price himself of being rejected by his people, persecuted by his people for being the messenger of God. And that story is well chronicled throughout the prophetic books too, that those that speak for God often are martyred and persecuted and rejected. But Jeremiah is a faithful servant of God, faithful messenger who brought the word of the Lord to his people, not because he hated them, but because he loved them and wanted them their hearts to turn back to God, which is what the Lord wanted. So anyway, God bless you all. We will talk again soon on Bread for the Journey. Have a great day.